Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David, Dan, and Hoges recap the Twins' 2024 baseball season. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson and special third chair in studio, Andrew Hoges Hoganson. We're all together again, boys, to talk about this 2024 season. A historic collapse, injuries abound, front office shenanigans. There's so much to discuss. I don't even know how we're going to fit it all into one episode.
I think we need to clarify first, because this podcast always relies on truth, that we are not actually all together in one place. We are on video chat right now. David is in Minneapolis. I'm out in the western suburbs, and Dan's in Washington. So we're not all in studio together.
It's a smart clarification. David just likes to... Words, really, what do they matter to David?
Well, thanks for those of you who are regular listeners to the show. Glad to have you back with us. If you're new to the show, I'm so happy you chose this to be the episode that you jumped on. Thanks for listening, and I hope we win your support for future episodes. This will not be our usual format. Typically, we talk about games each series. We have an episode, and we go through different segments, talk about what happened in the series, give our thoughts on it. But this episode will be a lot of our prediction talk from 2024. Were we right? Were we wrong? Were we very, very wrong? Those are basically the categories we have in front of us. I do want to mention one thing here, boys, that happened to me as a father that was very emotional, I'll say. So my kiddo was doing this fundraiser for school, and she went and she raised money, asked all of her relatives, and she baked them cookies or made them pictures, you know, all that. And depending on how much money you raised, you get to put little tickets into these drawings to win different items. So my kiddo comes home and she has something behind her back and she goes, Daddy, I brought you something. And, 99% of the time it's a picture or an art project she did at school, which I love. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a big fan of those things, but this one hit a little different. So my kiddo comes home and she pulls out from behind her back a signed Bailey Ober 8x10 photograph. And I was absolutely baffled because, of course, this was not something that I expected to have happen. But she was so proud, and she was thinking about her old man when she was there putting in these tickets. She said she really wanted the cat Squishmallow, but she took a couple of tickets and put them into the Bailey Ober photograph for her dad. And I teared up a little bit. I was just so moved by my daughter's just love for me in that moment.
Yeah, baseball is pretty romantic.
It is. How can you not be romantic about baseball?
Exactly. But with that, boys, let's take that emotional high and bring it way down here so we can talk about the 2024 postseason results. So if you didn't watch it, folks, it was a pretty fascinating postseason. The American League Central played a pivotal role in allowing the Yankees to make the World Series. On the other side of things, my boy Pete Alonso couldn't get it done in the NLCS. So the World Series is what Dan Thompson wanted deep down in his heart of hearts. He wanted Aaron Judge.
I didn't want it. It just, if it was going to happen, then this was a fine year to happen. And it was great in that regard, right? We had a very entertaining World Series that I did not want to have happen.
All rise for Dan's Judge love.
There was no bit of irony
there.
He
wanted Judge Ohtani. He was so excited about Judge Ohtani.
It is kind of fascinating, though, how the World Series basically wasn't about those two at all. I mean, Judge had one good game where he did okay. Ohtani with throwing out his shoulder where he ended up getting surgery on it. I mean, wasn't really a factor either. And I don't know. There's something to be said about the Yankees blowing the World Series by that fifth inning that they had with those three errors. Garrett Cole not covering first. I wasn't entirely sure which team I hated more. I mean, I knew I hated the Yankees more, but I didn't know it was to that degree until I was standing up and yelling at the TV out of happiness when they fell apart in the fifth.
It was definitely one of those series where I didn't know who I was going to root for going into it, but yes, it was moments like that, and it was also the Freddie Freeman home run in game one where I was like, okay, I guess I kind of want the Dodgers to win this, just kind of based on how things were going. But yeah, that fifth inning, Aaron Judge dropping the ball in center after making a ridiculously good catch.
And
Garrett
his
Cole
first
not
error
covering
in
first.
2024. It was his first error in 2024.
Was it really?
Yes.
Oh
I mean, it's mind-blowing.
I was sad that it didn't go more than 5 games, but the 5 games that we did get, I was able to watch most of them, and it was exciting. And I guess I feel fine for the Dodgers. They did win in 2020, but I do get that it's different when you can't have fans there and when you don't get to do all the things that go with it. So I did think that was pretty cool. But the moments you pointed out, that Hoges, that 5th inning was such an interesting inning to watch and memorable, and obviously Freddie Freeman's hit. So I think it gave some great moments, which is really what I think World Series, when I think back to great World Series, it is those moments that I think of.
This entire postseason was pretty phenomenal. I mean, obviously with the Twins not being in there, put a damper on it for us. But I mean, baseball won this year a lot. I think they got a lot of fans that were really amped up about it. The Dodgers-Padres series was phenomenal. We talked about that a little bit in our last episode that we did. All in all, some great baseball being played, some exciting baseball being played. And I agree with what you said, a 5-game World Series. I don't think it could have been more full of drama than it was. So, I mean, a great postseason.
It was fun that, like, the MVP sometimes I think is so focused on like one guy's performance in one particular game in the World Series, the defining moment of the series. Well, Freddie Freeman had about 30 moments in this series that he was certainly the MVP. It wasn't close. Nobody else could touch him. It was just crazy to see a guy who was hobbled for basically all of the last third of the season going into the postseason, and he's out there making dynamic plays. But guys, big players show up in big moments.
What drama, what a game, what a finish.
So last note here on the postseason before we get into the 2024 Twins season wrap. The Detroit Tigers made the postseason after being about 9 games back at the beginning of August. And Dan Thompson, out of the two of us, he's clearly the guy who speaks much more off the cuff, less thoughtful about the words that are coming out of his mouth, much more, given to emotional.
To be a gentleman.
My goodness.
Much more given to emotional rises. It's way easier to get him excited than me. I'm more of an even-keeled fellow. But Dan Thompson, in one of these outbursts that he's so typically has, he said that if the Tigers made the postseason, because I had claimed that if I was a Twins fan and the Twins were 9 games back in the AL Central, I still had hope that the Twins would make the postseason. And Dan thought that was insane. And he said he would buy me a trip to any gaming convention that I would like to go to if the Tigers made the postseason. Well, Dan, again, I've been planning my trip to Essen, Germany. It's in October next year. I'm very excited. I'm just wondering, where do I send the bill? Or do you just want to give me your credit card number and I can book the trips using that? Or how are we going to do this?
Just put it in my Amazon cart, David. I think that's how this works in the past. Okay, so all right. So I'm glad you brought this up the way that you did, so that I would send you to any gaming convention that you wanted to go to. But then I think there was more in the raw audio after that you left out. Something like within the contiguous 48. I think it was something like that.
The lower 48, I think is what I said.
So this is what I think. So where's your next gaming convention that you go to in early August? And Hoges and I always fill in at the same time, like right around the trade deadline.
Yeah, that's in Indianapolis.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to propose instead. I have been to Indianapolis a couple times because my father-in-law goes to the Indy 500, and he's been gracious enough to take me. So I will do this for you. I will pay the bill at St. Elmo's Steakhouse for you and your buddies to have, within reason, I will have to cap this, a fine steak dinner at St. Elmo. So that's what I'm willing to do to pay off this bet.
That is more than I could have possibly imagined, Dan Thompson. I am very excited. I will be getting the shrimp cocktail. I will be getting the shrimp cocktail. I will be getting the tomahawk. And I think
that's
they have
fine.
A nice whiskey flight. It's
as you should. If you can keep it under $500 as the tab, I think I would appreciate
my portion,
that.
Certainly. I can't speak to my
Your
buddies.
Total
see
portion.
What I can do.
Total portion.
Well, interestingly enough, I am a huge fan of these game shows, and these game conventions, and I've always talked about how badly I want to go with David next year. So I feel like my calendar just opened up now for this.
I'll be doing a solo show, I think, in early August.
It's just Dan sobbing into the microphone about the bill he just got from St. Elmo's.
I will send them my credit card and a note, and we'll figure it out. So I think that's a more reasonable, I think, realm here, because I've always wanted you to go to St. Elmo, and I don't think you have ever been.
I've been once, actually. Our first year in Indy, we went, but I couldn't ever justify going because of the cost again. But now, Dan, that's not an issue.
There you go.
What do you know?
As a neutral observer, this seems very, very fair to me.
Thank you, Hoges. I appreciate it.
It seems more reasonable than a trip to Germany, I'll be honest with you. But anyway, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. I'm looking forward to it. I suppose if we could work out a way for you to join us, that would be the top tier situation.
We may have to cancel the podcast for the weekend, I think, in that situation.
Just to see your face when the server says, is this together or separate? Okay, I think we've indulged in this fantasy world quite enough. Let's talk about this 2024 season. We're going to hold off talking about 2025 too much until our next episode. But one thing we do want to note, big surprise on Twitter, on Instagram, all over the place. Alex Kirilloff has announced his retirement after having season-ending back surgery. There's a back injury at play, and this is a guy who's struggled with injury every season that he's been with the organization. Really sad. A guy who was a top prospect, really looked to be the guy who is going to be leading the next generation of Twins players. So it's very sad. I hope he finds somewhere in the sport to land where he can still have a role in the game. But he seems like a stand-up guy. Obviously, we don't know him personally, but we wish him all the best. And it's just so sad when you see these guys who had such potential kind of flame out due to injury.
I think it's a good reminder for us as fans, because you're always constantly getting on these guys. Why aren't they playing more? We talk about it with Buxton, get out there, play more games, push through it. If you read Kirilloff's post, he was in serious pain, and his life is going to be impacted the rest of his life because of these injuries that he's had. And with having that much of a love for the game and knowing that you have to hang it up when you're still so young, it's a good reminder as fans that they are human. They do experience pain, and the stuff that these guys are pushing through is serious. And props to him for putting his health first, for getting out of it, and hopefully he can fix this up. He's still young. Hopefully he can heal. But yeah, it was a real bummer to read, and your heart definitely goes out to the guy.
Well, it was funny because at the beginning of the year, we were hoping he was going to be able to make a difference. But then, and actually segues really well in the next thing you have here, but they signed Carlos Santana, which ends up being a brilliant move for kind of all parties involved. They needed a first baseman. They couldn't count on Kirilloff. And then sure enough, Carlos Santana goes out and wins a Gold Glove. Not
only does he win a Gold Glove, Dan, he's in the running for a Silver Slugger also.
What does the Silver Slugger mean? I've always wondered what that actually goes for.
It has to do with offensive performance at each given position.
Okay.
So they usually have 3 finalists is how it breaks down. So both actually, Carlos Santana at first base is in the running for a Silver Slugger. And then also Willie Castro out of the utility spot is also in the running for a Silver Slugger award. In
full disclosure, I thought it was whoever had the highest batting average at that position up until this year, because I saw Carlos Santana and Willie Castro were finalists, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Don't they already know? So yeah, I guess you learn something new every year.
The batting title, right, is what that goes to. So
well, I know, but I meant at each position. I thought they gave the Silver Slugger to the top hitting third baseman, the top hitting shortstop, the top hitting second baseman. But I do like it that it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and they're taking all the offensive stats in instead of just batting average.
So another quick note here about the team in general. We've had a whole season now of the City Connect jerseys. I'm still rocking the hat. Are we as enamored with the logo and the jersey as much as we were when they were first released?
I really love the Minnesota outline. And I've said this before, I wish that was our state flag. I just love what that does with the Northern Lights, especially it's been such a good year for the Northern Lights too. And the star in the middle. So I love that element of it. I like all the swag that I got, but in 4 years, we're going to get a new batch anyway. So it's all just a big, one of my kids was asking me about it, and I was like, well, it's just a marketing scheme is all it is. But I'm totally bought in.
Yeah, I love it too. I got a sweatshirt that's got the M with the pinkish, yellowish, North Star at the bottom of it, the MN, which I think looks cool because it kind of looks like our logo a little bit for the podcast. So I love that sweatshirt. I do wish that they use that pinkish sunset color more instead of just the pure yellow on the actual jerseys, because I think that's a lot more unique. Right now, they kind of look a little bit more like the Red Sox and the Brewers and the Mariners ones. I get it. You're the last team to do it. You're going to match other teams. But yeah, of course, it's a marketing ploy, but it worked. And I bought some, and I'll probably buy some again in 4 years again. I do like Dan's thought on the state flag. It would be sweet. It's a really cool concept. That star star, I'm looking at David's hat right now. That star right in the Twin Cities too is sweet. Instead of having it at the top, I just think that's really unique there. But they should have submitted that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. One other note here, folks. If there's anybody who's listening who's a graphic designer, we're always looking for ways to improve the show a bit. One thing that we're really looking for next season is potentially to do a logo upgrade. So if you have interest in that and you're skilled in that area, feel free to reach out to us on X or on Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to get some new design options. We're also looking for somebody if you're interested in creating thumbnails for the episodes that we put up on YouTube. So that would be great. And it'd be fun to get a little bit more listener involvement and get people involved in the show who are talented to do so.
So there were many new rules. Baseball has been all about kind of changing up its stuff now the last couple of years. So I'm curious for your guys' thoughts on these things. So and which of these maybe you think was the most impactful. So the faster pitch clock, they shaved 2 seconds off of it from 20 to 18 when nobody's on base. All of this stuff with blocking bases and when you can do it and when you can't. A wider running lane to first, and then I think it was 1 fewer mound visit. I think they're down to 5 now instead of 6. I'm curious, what do you guys think about those? Any of those that you thought were most impactful?
Going to be total sacrilege because I'm sure all of these Dan thinks are the most impactful things in the world.
Well,
I didn't notice any of them. Like I really
none
truly
of them.
did
Are
not.
you kidding? The blocking of the bases you had to.
But that's been a pain in my side forever. Like that was always a stupid rule. I still think it's dumb. It's so ill defined. I'm not entirely sure that this year was different because of how they changed anything.
Oh no, I think they called it way more often this season.
Yeah, I think they probably. It seemed that they did. It seemed. Well, I don't know. Like,
good defense, Hoges.
Were we looking for it more than in previous years? It definitely felt more ridiculous this year than it had felt in the past because there were so many moments where it was like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Like that was kind of my reaction. Like if he's there and it's still 10, because Tommy Watkins sent a guy, I mean, like it's that kind of situation that I just don't know quite what players are supposed to do. I think overall they got it right, but that was my complaint, was that it got brought up too many times.
Yeah, I just feel like if you have the ball, you should be able to be wherever you want to be.
Right.
Like, and we're not going back to the Buster Posey years where you're just bowling catchers over or anything like that. But if you have the ball, you can be where you want to be. And if the ball takes you into the line, I think there were a few of those that really drive me a little bit nuts. I'm totally fine with like the not being allowed to drop the knee down when you're playing second base. I wish that would have been the rule when I played because my shins still feel that. But I don't know. It's so dumb when you see it live and you can't tell what's going to happen until you slow it down and replay and really look at 14 different angles and then you're calling a guy out. I think we need to be a little bit less legislative on this one.
Well, okay, I think it's a good point that I think the better way to say that, Hoges, is that it's hard to write a rule for something that is entirely subjective.
Yeah.
Like there's no way you're going to be able to lay out, you're not going to get, one of those I'm not a math guy. Not the compass. You know what I'm talking about?
A ruler?
Little half circle thing? Not a ruler. I know what a ruler
Venn diagram?
is. Not a Venn
compass
diagram.
where you put the point down and then you rotate it around it?
Yeah, is that what I'm thinking about?
yeah,
It's kind of like the half circle.
Yeah, it's a straight edge, but yeah.
What's the half circle thing though? You know what I mean? The ruler that's got like just the circumference here.
No, I don't know. I don't know what it's called.
What's that called?
A ruler with the half circle on the top of it?
Yeah.
That's just what I call it. I call it the ruler with the half circle on the top of it.
You're a high school teacher.
I'm not a math teacher. I don't know.
Well, I know your wife was a math teacher.
Well, she was, yeah, but she's not there. I don't know. Anyway, yes,
okay,
I think that's the thing.
This makes me feel infinitely better that neither of you knew what it was called either. Like I was like, okay, another moment where David's gonna say something stupid, and then I asked you guys, and Dan's like, no, it's definitely called the ruler with a half circle on top of it.
You got a scientist and a high school teacher that neither one of them could answer it for you. Well done.
Not
Good
a
job,
one.
David.
What I was trying to say was that like you're not gonna protractor.
Oh,
Protractor.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's the one.
It just came to me.
I knew exactly what to do, but in a much more real sense, I had no idea what to do.
Like you're not going to get an ump out there, using these measurement instruments to make the call. Like, no, I think less clarity in that rule and more judgment calls. I mean, guys, we watch a sport where a judgment call comes into play over 100 times a game with each ball and strike call.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure we can offer the subjectivity of blocking the bases up to the umpire without having each dot and tittle sorted out in the rule book.
It's a funny argument that you're making because just if like the basic, let's make it more subjective. You normally like, no, that's the dumbest thing ever. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of like it's almost about like whether he went or not on a strike. Like there's not a defined rule on what that means. You just kind of have to see it. And
But there
I
will
like
be.
that. Is that changing?
Well, we're breaking it into 2025 a little bit here, but they're currently testing it, and they're going to test it at AAA.
Oh, I don't
you
like
can
that.
challenge whether or not the guy swung or not.
No.
And
Oh my gosh.
I'm not joking. If you look, it's the funniest thing because they do like this 3D imaging, and then it's like a 2D on top of a 3D, and it shows the angle of the bat.
Oh, no.
And that's how the machine determines whether or not it's a swing or not.
Oh, no.
See, I told you,
don't
I
want
sent you
to.
guys a note. We could have a whole episode about rules, and I think it's clear that we need to have that. So tune in a month or so, listeners. We'll have an episode about rules. It'll be great.
When February hits and you got nothing better to do, listen to our rules podcast.
Hey, February spring training. What are you talking about, Hoges?
Anyway, so I'm going to move us on. So actually, Hoges, you mentioned Buster Posey earlier. He is now president of baseball operations for the Giants, which I think we all know the natural question, gentlemen.
It's the cows.
When's he coming back?
Well, I mean, clearly they keep Mauer around the organization. I feel like every other day he's at Target Field for some accolade or award they're giving him. It's
he
like
lives
I'm
here.
pretty sure they can just give him another job here. And now that we know that what's his face? I forgot his name already. Falvey. He's gone already, right? Levine. Which one is still here? I always forget.
So
Levine
Falvey's
is gone.
still there.
person.
Yeah, Levine
Falvey,
is gone.
yes.
Right.
Yes, he was the guy crying at the end of last season. Yep. Levine is gone. Just have Mauer take that position. Seems good.
Yeah, may as well.
It just, I feel like Mauer, I mean, I think he'd be a good coach if he really wanted to be. He's one of those guys who can be good at whatever he wants, or even like a general manager or something like that. The thing about him, though, which is always tough for these guys who are so naturally good, is they sometimes suck at teaching people because it's like, I just did it, like, because I knew how.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe he might have that syndrome a little bit where it's harder to teach. But again, like, that guy's good at everything. So I could see him being in this organization.
As someone who's not a Mauer advocate often, I don't know if I 100% agree with that assessment, Hoges, because I don't know, like Joe Mauer is a natural athlete, certainly, but I think baseball is such a defined sport and it's so important that you have a solid routine. Can you name another guy in the sport who has like different apparatus that they use to train themselves to better hit the ball than Joe Mauer? Like, clearly, not only was he a natural athlete, but he knew the steps to take to further himself in the sport of baseball. I think he actually could be very good, even if he just walked guys through his training regimen and like what he did to be able to track the ball as well as he could at the plate.
So are you saying if he just buys everybody one of those Mauer machines that drops the baseball, like, is that his hitting
They're all going to hit
strategy?
330 next year.
I mean, it couldn't hurt with this roster the way it performed this year, boy.
Just watch the ball hit your bat. Like, that's all you have to do. Like, that's what I
Oh.
tell my kids, right?
Well, I was playing ball with my oldest, who's 4, and he can actually hit like coach pitch really good. Like, he's crushing it. But my advice, I hate it. But every single time I just go, watch the ball. And I'm like, oh my goodness, can you not think of anything better to say?
Sometimes that's all it takes, though. Which, by the way, Hoges, were you not thinking? I think they showed it like Teoscar Hernandez in that big comeback inning,
Yes.
where they showed the camera, like the ump cam, and he hit that ball to left center, and I'm like, I could have done that. I think, like, I could have hit that pitch.
We're not doing this again. If you guys want to hear me melt down over Dan and Hoges
I do, kind of.
convincing themselves that they could hit major league pitching, please listen to our last episode. I think that segues poorly into our next portion here, which is our 2024 season wrap. So here's what we did, folks. At the beginning of the year, you can go back and listen. We had a season predictions show, which is statistically we don't do very well. Our statistics,
For yourself,
our
look at mine
predictions-
from last year. It was pretty
Okay.
good.
No, I mean, but you got to keep in mind that's Hoges saying that, so it probably wasn't as good as he's thinking that it was.
Probably
but,
not.
So we're going to go through each of our predictions and then the actual results. This was a rough year, boys. There were a few things that we were close on, but then there were a lot of things that we were not particularly close on.
I think it was another year where our crazy predictions were more accurate than our actual predictions overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, not terrible.
I mean, this is not
sorry,
going
go
to be fun. Like, I just want to say that. Like, last year, this was fun because, like, we had some playoff wins to talk about. This is not going to be fun. I don't even like I keep glancing at it and I look away because I just don't even want to see like how full my heart was when this season started.
It was an exciting season at the beginning, at least for us. Then it got
first
not
day.
so exciting in April. Then it got more exciting, and then it got not exciting yet again. But we'll get into that. We're going to start with most home runs. Dan had predicted Buxton would hit 38. I predicted Buxton would hit 32. Hoges predicted Lewis would take 34. Buxton actually had 18 and Lewis had 16 on the season. And the person who led, of course, makes a lot of sense. We all should have thought of this. Carlos Santana with 23 home runs. Your leader in the clubhouse, which is just speaks again to the season that guy had at age 38. What a deal the Twins got with him.
Right, the first of many. If I had told you at the beginning of the year that Santana was going to lead the Twins with home runs and it was going to be 23, how happy would you have been with that?
As far as batting average goes, so I picked Royce Lewis to bat 304. David picked Eddie Julian to hit 287. These are terrible when you look at the actuals next to him. And then Hoges picked Carlos Correa to hit 295. And in the end, the actual was Carlos Correa with 310. Now, he didn't qualify, I think, according to Major League Baseball's standards. We've been over that before. So Hoges gets the win on this one. Royce Lewis batted only 233. Eddie Julian batted 199. So David and I
the Mendoza line.
I know. And I think that the fact that Lewis and Julian struggled was symbolic of the struggles that the team had in the way that they had hopes in those guys that they were let down by.
Yeah, moving on to on-base percentage, Dan and I both took Julian at 385 for Dan and 395 for myself. Hoges took Correa at 360, and in actuality, it is Correa, and again, overshot Hoges' estimate here at 388. But again, Correa, you do have to take with a grain of salt because he missed so much of the season. But clearly, if you can get a full season out of this guy, my goodness, what sort of damage he could have done.
I think that's what feels so hollow. I don't really feel like gloating about either one of those two because, I mean, to be fair, I put up a huge stink last year about how your guys that you were saying won didn't actually qualify. So it is on tape. I'd be a bit hypocritical if I turned on it. But yeah, he just missed so much time. And again, not any fault of his own. Plantar fasciitis, what are you going to do about it? And it clearly impacted him when he was struggling with that. But I agree, David. Let's get a full season out of this guy. How many guys on the Twins can we say that about? But man, like I hope he's healthy next year.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like Willie Castro would be the winner of all of these categories if we went by plate appearances who are actually legitimate contenders.
Well, and then as far as OPS, this is on base plus slugging. So I had Buxton thinking that he was going to hit 38 home runs and have an OPS of .915. Jeffers was David's pick at .870. And then Hoges was with me with Buxton, but even higher at .980. And in the end, it was Correa with .905. Buxton actually was second on the team with .859. And then Jeffers was a little bit lower, though he was doing really well early in the year, but then he fell off hard at the end, finished with a .732.
Yeah, David looked like a genius for a while here. Probably the first, 4 months of the season, I mean, was looking really, really good. And I mean, again, looking at all of these, I really didn't realize Correa was having that great of a year before he got hurt. And then even after, when he came back, he was on fire for the last stretch of the season.
Well, I think there wasn't a lot of power right at the beginning of the season, but he was always on base. He was hitting a ton of singles, and he was always on base. And so it was harder to see him in this like all-star light because he wasn't hitting a ton of homers. But my goodness, he was definitely getting on base, and he was hitting the ball hard.
Well, and then to finish the year with an OPS of 905, the power came around. Like that definitely happened. I think that's one thing that we need to remember. He's not a cold weather guy. We have to give him, and he's even said that too. He's like, I've been horrible in April my entire career. So I think that's a good thing to think about for next year. If he starts off a little bit slow or the power's not there, it'll come around. Like that's just how his seasons kind of go for him.
Shifting toward the pitching, so ERA for starter, that was one of the things that we predicted. I picked Pablo Lopez with 3.25 as his ERA. David picked Lopez at 2.95. Hoges picked Ober at 3.20. And in the end, it was Joe Ryan with an ERA of 3.60. Now, he didn't play, obviously, the last month and a half, 2 months of the season. Ober finished with an ERA of 3.98, but Lopez was 4.08. I remember, David, we talked about whether Lopez could actually lower his down by the end of the year and get to Ryan. And he wasn't quite able to, but Lopez was good down the stretch. But in the end, I think this was an issue for the Twins, the fact that they missed Joe Ryan so much down at the end of the year.
I think if he doesn't get injured, I think they make the postseason. I think there's enough games there of him starting that, and just sort of the cascading effect, because Ryan tended to pitch later into innings. You got a few more fresh arms out of the bullpen in that situation. I think that really hurt them in a lot of ways outside of just missing his starts.
Well, and Rocco, for whatever reason, even if Ryan's getting shelled, is still going to let him pitch 7 innings. So, like, it's always that guy you're always getting, like, only 2 or 3 or 4 innings that you need out of your bullpen on a Joe Ryan start, which is a huge credit to him. it. And also on this one, I think this is the one I feel the best about for picking Ober. And I get that this isn't fair, but if you take out the tipping pitches starts, I think he's a lot closer to that 3.2 than he would have been otherwise.
And remember, Hoges, if you remember back to our episode, you said that Joe Ryan was going to have a bad season.
Don't remember that.
If you remember, that's what
We're
happened.
getting to that. That's just a couple up here. We got a couple more to do first.
Okay.
No, nope.
ERA for reliever here. Dan had Griffin Jacks at 2.75. I had Duran at 2.42. Hoges had Duran at 1.97. In actuality, it was Griffin Jacks, but even better than Dan predicted at 2.03. The man was unhittable.
Yeah, I wish I had lowered that and thought higher of him, but Duran was not great. I think we can agree that this season he just wasn't as sharp. His ERA was 3.64, and there were so many more shaky innings. It seemed like his control wasn't there. At times his velocity wasn't there. He just was not quite the same pitcher. It was a good thing they had Griffin Jacks this year to kind of cover for him in a lot of situations.
In this weird world, I think there's an argument for Jacks to be MVP because, I mean, it's weird going to a reliever, but the amount of games that I'm using this word not in like the true definition, but that he saved for the Twins was huge, even without having that closer role.
Yeah, I think moving on then, it's a good segue into season MVP, or our beast as we so call it. Dan went with Carlos Correa, who had a line of 25 homers, 98 RBIs with an OPS of 840. I had Correa with slashes of .272, .357, and .468. And then Hoges swinging for the fences with Royce Lewis with lines of .260, .370, .550 with 34 homers and 94 RBI.
Yeah.
So this is... that didn't happen.
The sample size got
bigger,
us. Let's just say.
The sample size definitely brought those numbers back down to earth a little bit. So this is our first subjective category where we can't just look at the numbers and say who did the best. The question is, who was the Twins' season MVP? Aaron Gleeman always does a great job at The Athletic. He writes out his sort of MVP ballot for the Twins. And he had Carlos Correa as his number 1, Buxton as his number 2, Griffin Jacks, who Hoges just mentioned, as number 3, then Carlos Santana number 4, Willie Castro number 5. And I think that you can make an argument for almost all of those guys. I think if, again, Correa, had he just played a few more games, I think he's the easy selection. Castro, just because of his versatility, has to be in the conversation. But Carlos Santana, the more you look at his numbers and what he did at first base, it's hard not to put him near the top for me.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go Correa, but mostly just meaning if you're taking the true definition, who was most valuable to this team, he plays a whole year. I think that the team is also in the playoffs if Correa makes it the whole year.
Yeah.
But if I can't take him just because of games played, I kind of like the Jacks argument because he pitched so well in that relief role when they really, really needed him to. And I think his ERA could have been even lower, but they overused him quite a bit, especially at the end of the season when they really had to push for it. So I like that. I'd agree, though, David. I think you can kind of make an argument, not a great one based on just how this year went for the Twins, and no one really stood out incredibly so, but those other guys definitely have a say for it.
I would make a case for Bailey Ober. I just think what he meant to stabilize this rotation, the step up that he was, and Hoges, you joked about it and throwing out those couple of starts, the one against the Braves and then the one against the Royals. I just think without Bailey Ober, this team wins something in the 70s of starts, and it's not even close. They're not competitive without what he was able to bring to them to bail out this beleaguered bullpen in so many spots.
Do you guys know that I got a signed picture of Bailey Ober? I'm really excited about it.
It's a play on words.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, I don't know if we're going to come to consensus on who the MVP is, but
that's a good point, though, right? That we can't come to a consensus, and none of like the options are that great. I mean, I think that just showed how razor thin this team's margin for error was because there wasn't a lot of depth.
Now we move on to season LVP, or least valuable player, or our bench, as we so lovingly call it. I like this particular category because I'm the only one who was close, I'd say. So
that's fair.
Dan took Carlos Santana, who obviously was not the least valuable player. Dan said he'd hit 10 home runs with 40 RBI.
And then he led the team. He led the team in home runs, and I predicted he would have 10. Oh, my gosh.
I had Alex Kirilloff batting .230, and that was much closer to reality, and obviously he just wasn't on the field enough to really even, that's what made him least valuable, is just because he didn't play enough games to make it matter. And then Hoges had Joe Ryan with a 4.5 ERA, which I think I said this at the time. I don't know that we should just like turn our backs on a starter throwing 4 or 5 ERAs. Like, I mean, we might take that a lot of this season.
I agree with you, David. If we had to pick like who won each category, this is for sure your best one right here.
So who do we want to give this to actually, though? Because there are no shortage of options for this either. You got Kirilloff, maybe Miranda or Lewis or Kepler or Margot. I mean, who would you say caused the most issue? I guess I don't even know how to phrase this question here. Who was bad?
Margot
worst?
was horrible. Like, I want to give it to Margot, but if you're going with like potential and then actual performance, we didn't think we were going to get a lot out of Margot. Granted, not playing center field barely at all, and we thought that was his one thing that he was going to do was pretty terrible. I think you got to give it to Royce Lewis though, because him at the end of the year was horrible. And Dan kept bringing it up on every single podcast episode, I feel like, but how many times he came up in huge situations where he didn't get a hit, and we're so used to seeing that. I mean, we're talking about a season where they barely missed the playoffs because of this epic collapse at the end. A few more of those, he gets a base hit, they win those games, and here we go. For the guy that never slumped, he slumped hard at the end of the year. I think he's my pick.
You were the chosen one.
I would actually go with a different guy, Mr. Canada himself.
Oh, Canada.
They were counting on Eddie Julien to hold down second base or maybe first base. And I remember the play that he didn't make at second. I think it was against the Cardinals. It was just, there were so many moments defensively and so many moments at the plate. I mean, the guy ended up with an OPS of 615 in 94 games. That's a lot of games to have such a low OPS. And all of the spots where he was leading off for a good section of the year, they had a lot of eggs in Eddie Julien's basket, and a lot of them cracked.
Ogres are like onions.
It wouldn't be an episode of Men for the Win if Dan didn't make a crazy comparison.
I thought that was a pretty good one. Eggs cracking in baskets. Anyway.
Do you guys play Connections, like the New York Times Connections or whatever? Because it was
yeah.
Shrek, and it was ogres and onions, and Shrek was on there. And right when I saw onions, I went, ogres are like onions. And then it got to that one, because we do it at lunch with my work friends, and they're like, hey, you were right. How'd you know that? I'm like, well, I hear it a lot.
I hear it a lot. Yeah, I don't know exactly who I want to land on. Part of me wants to choose Kepler just because the German roots really let us down here. I just think that I built Max Kepler up so much in my mind because of 2019 and what he did. And I should have been listening better to those who said that's an outlier season. Look at the rest of his stats. He hasn't ever been that great. And I think it's hard to ignore the greatest right field defense ever played at Target. It's just going to be a little bit disappointing for a guy who's been a part of this organization for so long, who could always count on being in right field. But it is time to move on. It's time to give these young guys a shot who are actually putting the ball in play. And yeah, you can have a lower batting average, but Max, you're not hitting nearly enough home runs to justify the batting average that you're putting up.
Since you mentioned that, I do want to bring up one guy that we haven't talked about at all. Matt Wallner actually had a pretty decent second year, specifically with how horrible he started. I mean, he even got sent down to the minors, and then he came back. They had that series against the White Sox, kind of figured it out again. With Lewis having a sophomore slump, with Julien having beyond a sophomore slump. Wallner's numbers, he ended up having an OPS of 894, which an OPS plus of 149. Pretty good. He still hit 259 for a guy who strikes out all the time. That's probably the most likely replacement for Kepler, at least a platoon of that in right field. He's got a great arm too. See if he can figure out how to play that wall. But yeah, it's definitely the end of an era, David. I'm interested to see how you cope with your guy moving on.
Well, and I'm just worried because Matt Wallner is always going to be at risk for the steroid testing that he's taking through the nose every time he sniffs his helmet.
Oh, that's so gross. If he continues being this good, someone's going to ask him. So hopefully we'll at least get the answer somewhat soon.
We're about to begin bonding adamantium to weapon exoskeleton.
And I mean, worst case scenario, he gets hit about every other game, so it should be fine.
Yep, he'll get. That's how you boost the on-base percentage.
A couple more here. So crazy predictions. And again, I said these were interestingly close, I think. So I picked that Simeon Woods Richardson would make 15 plus starts and finish with an ERA under 4. Well, Simeon Woods Richardson actually made 28 starts, 5-5 record, a 4.17 ERA. So I wasn't quite right on that one there, but 133 and 2/3 innings pitched, 117 strikeouts. He obviously slowed down late. If we had kind of cut that off, if he had gotten the Bailey Ober treatment from a couple years ago, his ERA would have been under 4. But they needed him down the stretch. He was crucial on this team.
Yeah, again, if we're talking about who's going to win a category, I think this one was yours too, Dan. And it was pretty evident, like, in April that you were going to win this. And it was pretty funny because, I mean, your craziest prediction comes true in April already, which just showed, like, how in trouble this rotation was. It was so nice to see him do that. But again, this would not have been news that would have made us particularly happy if we would have said this was going to happen.
We should note, too, at the time of the prediction, Hoges and I both felt that this prediction wasn't crazy enough. Like, it felt too much within reason. So, yes, he was the closest in the category, but I would also argue his prediction was the least crazy among the
That's
three.
probably true.
Well, and to be fair, SWR did double basically the starts that Dan had predicted for him. So I mean, we both said this to him. I don't know if we said it on the air or off the air, but we both said you should have went higher, and then we both could have gotten behind that a little bit more, which would have been right too.
Yeah, so my prediction was Correa would return to health and finish in the top 3 MVP voting. Neither of those things happened. As Dr. Hoges informed us, the plantar fasciitis is indeed hereditary, which means it transfers from one foot to the other.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
I'd like to defend myself on this. I meant like if you have it in one foot, are you more likely to get it in the other foot as well? Not that you're gonna like have to keep your feet separate.
You know what hereditary
would be more about the
means, though,
I mean, like
contagiousness
genetic.
of it.
Like yes, like I meant.
You work
Go
for
ahead.
a chemical
Go
company,
continue.
don't
This
you?
is good.
Like,
No, I'm done. I'm done.
is it a dominant trait? Like, does his toe lean one way, Hoges? Is that like they do the hitchhiker thumb, in middle school, and they tell you about the little squares?
Hoges
you have
is
to
a
make?
scientist.
cool.
He
The
knows
people who could,
Punnett
like-
squares, right? It's got to be a part of that.
Anyway, yes, that did not happen. I think that it's possible had Correa had a full season. This is obviously more likely. I guess I'm sort of optimistic in that he didn't make this prediction come true, not because he didn't meet the prediction standards. It was because he wasn't on the field. Like, he wasn't even eligible to make that prediction come true.
Yeah, and he performed at an MVP like caliber. So I feel like my prediction is almost in the same realm as yours. Like, it's not right. I definitely didn't get it right, but it's like sort of right. I said that Buxton would make it through an entire season, which he only played in 102 games this year, which is the second most in his entire career. He played 140 games back in 2017.
Crazy.
And he did technically make it through the entire season. He was playing at the end. He also played a lot of center. So it was definitely a step up from where he's been, but definitely not what we were hoping for.
But like, we've seen the things about, like, the Gleeman has pointed this out on The Athletic, that he actually is earning the Twins more than his contract right now. I mean, like, he's been a good investment in that way. A lot of people in baseball make a lot more money than Byron Buxton. The Twins have actually gotten a good value out of that. That contract looks pretty smart, all things considered, because he was a huge asset to this team this year.
It looks genius. And with how he plays when he's out there, it's huge too. So yeah, I love that too, because he's way overachieving what his contract is, even in factoring only the 102 games played. Even when he only played 85 in 2023, I believe when Gleeman wrote it up, it was still like he should have been paid $3 or $4 million more than they paid him. So that is looking like a deal. It is a deal. It already is a deal.
Well, on to the big one here, boys. Our season predictions for record. None of us got it right. We all got that they didn't win the World Series correct. None of us predicted a World Series victory. Dan had the Twins finishing at 90-72 with losing in the ALCS. But Hoges had the exact same prediction, which is pretty cool, 90-72 with a loss in the ALCS. I was a bit more optimistic, 93-69 with a loss in the World Series. That's not what happened. The Twins finished the season at 82-80, and they missed the postseason entirely. Finished fourth in the AL Central. The only team they beat was the Chicago White Sox, of whom Hoges wished he was a fan as opposed to the Twins, who lost 121 games with a run differential of negative 306.
I still stand by that. I know you guys think I'm just trolling, but I would have rather had their year than the Twins' year.
There's always next year,
I mean,
Hoges, I guess, if you're a White Sox fan.
I am scared to talk about next year and what the AL Central could look like and where the Twins may stack up. But let's go quickly into our segments. We're going to start with Puckett's Picks season winner.
Touch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
It was me, boys. I won Puckett's Picks. And it wasn't close, and it was never close, and I absolutely dominated. My genius is better than the genius of all the peoples in Minnesota Twins Puckett's Picks.
Well, okay, so you have a lot of stats here. I'll just start with the wins. So you did have 23.5 points. Hoges had 17.5. I had 13.5. The listeners had 11.5. And then, David, you've really crunched some numbers here. I'm going to start to run through these. So Hoges Hoges, you win the award for most variety. I feel like this is back when we played GoldenEye and you would get like those awards at the end of the season or the end of the matchup, like the most variety with 15 players picked.
Part of that is me just getting desperate at the end of the year and trying to pick losers so that I could pick second in the upcoming series.
It should be noted, too, as far as points scored, Hoges actually outscored me on the season, 243 to 240.
That's because I kept getting second every single stinking week. Even when I would pick Vasquez, then he would go and hit 3 homers, but you pick a guy who got 4.
But then our most selected players here, the listeners took Lewis 17 times, Dan took Buxton 9 times, Hoges took Buxton 10 times, and I took Correa 9 times. And then our best performer, this was a hard one to exactly select. I tried to choose the highest percentage wins among players who you selected more than once. The listeners took Miranda twice, and he won once for them. Dan took, to tell you how bad a season Dan had, Dan took Castro 6 times, and he won twice, and that was his best performer.
Oh, man.
Hoges is tied between Correa and Lewis, who each won 2 of the 4 times that he picked them. And I actually had 2 real standouts. Kepler I took 5 times, and he won 4 of the times that I picked him. And then Carlos Correa, he won 6 times out of the 9 that I chose him.
Nice.
The flip side of that, the worst performer, the listeners, my goodness, it was a rough season for the listeners here, boys. They took Lewis. He only won 3 times out of the 17 they picked him. Buxton never won, and they picked him 5 times. And Correa won 2 out of the 10 times they selected. Ooh. Dan had 2 guys just about as good as the listeners. He took Lewis and Larnach each 4 times, and neither of them secured him a victory. Hoges took Miranda 6 times and never got him a victory. And then I took Larnach. This was I was pretty impressed with this, actually. I picked him 3 times. He never won, but he was my worst performer, which I think I'd take season over season for sure.
I think the listeners had a disadvantage this year with having to go first, because I think if either one of us or any one of us would have been picking first, we would have picked Lewis that many times or Buxton, and it just didn't pay off with doing that. We took so long to learn anything this year, I feel like, because we kept thinking these guys were going to bust out of it, and they just never really did.
I like this other thing you've got with the most high score performances too. So we added kind of the half-point bonuses here. Santana had 7 of those half-point bonuses. Lewis had 7, because when he was on, he was on. Miranda was 6, Buxton, Correa, Wallner with 5, Jeffers with 4, Kirilloff with 3, actually, Castro with 3, and then Julian, Kepler, Martin with 2, and then Vasquez and Lee each with 1 apiece.
Remember that one episode that we recorded where we talked about Christian Vasquez like the whole time, because he was like, it was the greatest series, both offensively and defensively, the Twins have seen at catcher since Joe Mauer.
That's because he went to Grand Slam. Figured it all out.
Exactly. And the Tiger series. Yeah.
Triple play. It was great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to see this next season. A quick note about next season's scoring for Puckett's picks. We are going to increase the negative for double plays hit into to -2. That again is a shout out to listener Joe, I think, on Twitter. He pointed out that grounding into double play should be more costly than a strikeout. So we're going to do that next season.
All right, we'll keep working through our segments here with Rocco's Season Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
So Manny Margot finished the year with something that was like 0 for 30 in pinch hitting appearances. And Rocco's faith in Manny Margot was curious at best, right? But I thought this dogged insistence on splits really showed this year, kind of for better or worse, because Rocco really doubled down, I thought, with, making what he thought was the mathematically better choice.
No, they brought it backward. Tell them to turn it around.
Yes, I think he did that this season. I don't think he did it as much as he did in seasons previous. I do think he's starting to budge a little bit, and there's something to be said about sticking with a hot hitter, even if it's not the best matchup.
Well, I know that it has been 30, David. Like, how is that not being doggedly in your?
Thank you, Hoges. I appreciate that.
I'm not saying that he like made a fundamental shift in his philosophy, but I don't think he was as firm this season as he was in last season, for instance.
I feel like part of that. I mean, the Margot one, I maybe we can grant as an outlier. That's just ridiculous. I have no idea what broke in Rocco's head to keep doing that again and again and again and again. I'll say it another 28 times. I mean, it's just stupid. But, like, he didn't have that many options off the bench either. Like, there were guys, I mean, which is what we've been screaming at. Like, hey, if a guy is batting 120 and it's Christian Vasquez and Jeffers is hot, don't switch them. I get that that's a bad example because they're both righties, but I feel like you're right in that sense where sometimes it's like, hey, I'm going to let my best hitters hit instead of doing a pinch hit.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's got to be a lack of emphasis on defensive fundamentals and base running. I mean, we saw it time and time again that on the defensive side of the ball, the Twins made a lot of dumbs, as Hogue so lovingly calls them. So yeah, they don't show up on the spreadsheet as an error. However, they should show up as a dumb because they're making poor decisions that result in runs being given to the opponent, and it drives me absolutely insane. And I think sort of the second piece of this, for Rocco in particular, is how did you not have a true backup for Byron Buxton in center field? And when you said that Manny Margot was going to be your guy and then you never put him in center, like, who screwed up there? I really want to know, was it the front office told Rocco that, no, this guy plays a solid center and he can be your guy? Or was it Rocco thought, he saw him in spring training and he's like, you know what? I don't care how punctual he is. We're not going to put him in center field.
Well, David, you're segueing perfectly into mine, because if we think that ownership had their hands tied with who they could go out and get this year, how much more did Rocco have his hands tied because he just didn't have those guys that he can put in there? So we'll never know if maybe Rocco's like, no, we can't play Margot in center field. That is just not going to happen. It's such a cop-out, but I always feel like this segment for him in an over-year plan is so difficult when he didn't have the depth and he didn't have the players to do anything about it. What are we really judging? Like, I think we talked about it more this year than almost any other year. What else is he supposed to do? You have what you have, and there's nothing else you can do about it. I did want to pick Dan's because I still think that his worst decision that he made was sticking with Margot as long as he could this year, and that 0 for 30 split. And I do agree, like, you got to get less cute with some of those pinch hitters. Maybe, David, you're right that it was less this year, but it just seemed like it hurt way more than it ever did. There's stats out there too that the Twins were one of the worst pinch hitting teams this year. Their batting average is like 220 or something like that when they pinch hit, which, to be fair, their team batting average is probably like 235, so I'm not sure it got that much worse anyways. But and that's why I think that this 2025 is a big year, because eventually Rocco's not going to get the benefit of the doubt for not having that talent around. Fair or not, like that this next year, I think if they come out and they play like they did with some of those fundamental mistakes, I think it could be his last year.
Hogs, you make a really good point about the pinch hitting. Like, pinch hitting is supposed to be better than your normal average. It's not supposed to be worse. There were so many times late in the year, there was a stretch, I think it was like in August, we were pointing out that Matt Wallner and Trevor Larnach had like fewer than 10 plate appearances against lefties. Like, at some point, you just got to let the guys have a chance here. And when the alternative is Manny Margot, I'm sorry. Like, at some point, you have to throw out the averages and just say, listen, I think Matt Wallner's a better hitter. And they both proved they could hit lefties. It wasn't like it was impossible for them, especially if you're seeing this as an audition to replace Max Kepler. Max Kepler is kind of the one lefty that seemed to be able to be left in those situations and play full games. You have to let these other guys try.
Well, let's be honest, Matt Wallner just closes his eyes and swings as hard as he can anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's coming from a right hand or a left hand.
And that's why his sense of smell is heightened, because his eyes are closed so often.
He can smell the baseball. It's like, what was his name? Was it Irving Santana that always said smell baseball all the time, that Twins pitcher? And I still don't know what that means, but I guess that's was his catchphrase.
The smell of baseball in the morning.
Baseballs do smell good, like that leathery kind. I like the smell.
Delightful.
All right, well, let's keep pushing here into our season Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
I'll go first again. So when Correa suffered an injury to his foot, contagious or not, hereditary or not, right around the All-Star break, it was kind of the beginning of the end for this team. And we heard, that he was only going to be out not as long as he was the previous year. And I think it was good that he was gone as long as he was, in the sense that he needed to heal. And then he found that witch doctor that found that special treatment for his foot and things like this. But like, that was just... We've pointed this out. He was having, I would say, an MVP level kind of season, or at least, in the votes there when he was healthy this year. Absolutely. The fact that he was unhealthy for so much of it, I just thought that was the turning point in the year. And I know that Joe Ryan got hurt kind of around that same time too, but that was the key moment for me.
I'm going to go with sort of just what correlates with that move from Correa's injury, which is just the drop off of offensive production in the last third of the season. It just felt like any opportunity the offense had to hit with runners in scoring position was met with absolute, I don't even know if apathy is the right word. It just seemed like the team just stopped caring. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand why. You were in postseason position for nearly the entire season, as of May, and you can't figure it out how to get a couple of more guys home and win a few baseball games. I just think it really surmised the entirety of the season. If you look at, the last 6 weeks of the season.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna steal from your point, and it's actually your take too, David, because you were at these games or one of these games. But I'm going with the Orioles series at the end of the year. There, you were there, and you said it felt like a Tuesday night in May. Like it felt like there was nothing on the line, and neither the Royals or the Tigers really put those spots away. It was the Twins to win right up until the last week of the season, and they failed against the Marlins. They failed against the Orioles, who weren't playing for anything, and it was disappointing to even watching the games on TV. You're like, there's no life in this team. There's no fight. No. And I don't know why it was like that. And for you to send that text when you were at the stadium that it felt like that was so disheartening. And I think it kind of summed up the season. It felt like, yeah, a lot of bad stuff happened to this team. They didn't get the help that they needed. They didn't have the depth that they needed, but they still had a chance, and they didn't. And there was even some infighting in the clubhouse at the end of the year with guys saying like they just didn't sense the urgency, and that's concerning. And you wonder if that does carry on into next year.
Well, let's keep going here. Mauer's musings for 2025.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's musings.
So kind of following along that, the Twins have changed their hitting coach. So David Popkins is gone, and so is everybody else who was helping him. And so they brought back a guy who was actually in the organization earlier. They brought back Matt Borgschulte, and so he's going to be the guy now. He had been with the Orioles for the last couple of years. He's a younger guy. He's only 33. So I guess to me, a lot of next season hinges on whether he can smooth out the highs and the lows and, be better than average. I think that's my big question is he going to make a difference next season?
I mean, you always wonder how much these guys really impact hitters, but there's something to be said about at least having hitters reevaluate what they're doing when they're struggling. And I would hope that these guys were absolutely screaming at the hitters to make some changes when they weren't getting hits in big moments. But my goodness, just to put the ball in play, there were so many strikeouts. So I hope a new hitting coach makes a lot of difference, at least just to get in the guy's head a little bit more than what it seems like this hitting coach was able to do.
Well, it's such a dumb cliche, but in sports, you can't fire the players, so you got to fire someone. And a hitting coach makes sense here because if you look at what most of the young guys did with Miranda, Julian, Lewis, just the drop off in production that they had this year, those are the guys that you're really looking at with, I feel like, with a hitting coach, and they didn't do well. They had to make a change. This one makes sense. We'll see what happens.
Well, and Popkins got a job. I mean, he got hired by the Blue Jays, so he's not gone. I wish him the best, obviously, too, but I just thought that was funny that he landed somewhere else anyway.
A lot of comments right away.
Canada. Hey, there we go.
And a lot of comments right away about people saying, what did the Blue Jays do to deserve this? And it's who knows? We'll see what happens.
Oh, Canada. So my question, boys, is this a postseason team if there are truly no meaningful additions? Because are the Royals and Tigers for real? Are they going to be postseason contenders now next season with the Guardians? I just don't know that this team can keep up. I'm just not sure that this team is going to be really a force to be reckoned with next season, even if everybody returns to health.
I think that's my if. If everyone is healthy, this is a postseason team. If they're not, they don't have the depth and they aren't. I think it's as simple as that.
I think they're hoping that some of the younger guys in the system too, they've had a highly touted farm system for the last couple of years. One of the things that Falvey and Levine were noted for in Cleveland was that they were able to build up a farm system. And sure enough, I think they've been able to do that on paper, at least for the Twins. So they're relying on those young guys taking big steps, but the depth of this team is not what it was a few years ago either. And so I think that is the question, but the depth is always tested. I have a hard time believing that everybody will stay healthy. But at the same time, isn't that kind of what baseball always comes down to? Is are you healthy at the right times to be able to finish the year strong?
I don't know. Freddie Freeman was batting with one leg, and so he wasn't healthy, but he still made quite an impact in the World Series.
That's true.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting too, and we'll get to this and when we talk about 2025 more. But I feel much more nervous about our offense than I do our starting pitching, just because of how well guys like Zebby Matthews and David Festa and SWR did. There is actually weirdly kind of more depth there than there is with the offense. So it'll just be interesting. And when was the last time we said that where we felt better about our starting pitching than the actual offense? But I guess we'll see. I mean, everything can change.
What do you have, Hoges?
I guess my question, and we talked about it in our last episode as well, is does this potential change in ownership have any impact on this season at all? All signs point to no, just because that process is probably going to be 6 months. But if something moves fast, do we start spending more? I mean, maybe that's just wishful thinking.
I wish I could tell you. It just seems very unlikely that the Pohlads are going to be willing to spend money knowing that a deal is imminent. And because it sounds more and more like, no, we're not going to see this sale go through until the season has already started. I mean, you really hope a ton of guys are holding out hope for bigger contracts. That's the only way that this shakes out the Twins' way is if there's a bunch of these free agents who don't sign deals because the money's not as much as they want, and new owners are willing to spend that money.
So you're saying I should return my Soto Twins jersey that I purchased?
Didn't you get a cheap Correa jersey because you bought it after the one-season deal that he opted out of?
No, not me. I think my brother did. Steven did, though.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Correa deal. Twins should do that the one that he has now, but even like the first one when he had the 1 year, $30 million, then you opt out. The Twins should do that all the time. If Soto wants to do that, if Pete Alonso wants to do that, we're here. We'll pay you 1 year, and then maybe we'll sign. Maybe you'll have a screw in your ankle that no one knew you had, and we'll end up keeping you for 8 years after that.
That apparently is going to rust away.
It's going to blow up. I think it's literally ticking, and that's what they can hear.
Maybe it's hereditary, though, when you think about it.
Well, hopefully his left ankle doesn't get it then, too. If they touch, if it's contagious, he's really got to keep his feet apart.
Okay, let's keep going here. We're a season grade, which I don't even know why we're doing this.
Series grades.
I feel like I get
Dan,
set up to fail here because so I went with my normal system. So I don't know. I need to change this system. I didn't like this rubric. I'm going to reflect.
Every year.
Every year. It's called continuous improvement, David. I don't love this. I'm going to try to be brief. Advanced retreat, a 7 out of 10. I don't know. I don't know where to land here because I can't give them a 0 and I can't give them a 10. They still finished 82 and 80. They were competitive till, the last week or two of the season. Well-placed baseball. It's hard to encompass all of the things that happened this year. I guess I'm calling it a 7 out of 10 because they weren't totally inept in just about anything, but they weren't great at much of anything by the end of the year. I mean, their bullpen was in shambles. Their starting rotation wasn't healthy. They didn't have the bats. They didn't hit timely. They didn't hit for power. There was nothing about this team that inspired excellence or reflected it. So I guess I'm calling it a C-, but then I see your grades and I feel like, well, they're more accurate than mine.
Far more accurate, Dan.
Yeah.
It's an F. The collapse was historic. There's so many people to blame for the way that this season crumbled at the end. They should have made the postseason, no question. Even if they got swept in the postseason, they should have at least gotten there. I mean, that series that Hoges brought up about the Marlins and then the Orioles, my heart literally skipped a couple of beats because of how upset I got in those moments thinking about those series. This was a terrible season. If you take the first third and the last third, they could have been fighting with the White Sox for the title of most losses ever if they didn't have this great, middle third of the season.
So would you rather they didn't have that great middle and then we could have had a much less stressful year?
No. Well, yeah, it probably would have been less stressful. That's fair. But no, this is an F. There's just not a lot of good things to say about this season.
Okay, but all right, before we get to Hoges, but they were an above 500 baseball team. Like, that has to count for something.
Fourth in the division. It doesn't matter, Dan, when the 3 teams in front of you in the division had better records.
Okay, but then how can you be mad at Hoges' take about, like, the White Sox season? Like, there has to be some measurable difference between this season and the White Sox season, doesn't there?
Well, yeah, Dan, if somebody in your class scores a 20 and somebody scores a 40, they're both getting Fs, no?
No, but I just don't see it that way. Like, again, if we're talking about a 60-win team versus a 50-win team or a 70-win team, like, yeah, but, like, they were there, like, at the end. I mean,
I think
if it were inverted, if they had made a rush to the end, right? Like if they had gotten all of their wins here at the end and they just came up short, would that feel different?
You know how when you're sitting in a class and there's a minute left to go in the class and the teacher goes, any questions? And someone asks a question, and I'm about to do that right now on this one. Here's the thing. The difference is the expectations. So the expectations were to make the playoffs, and they didn't this year, which your rubric, Daniel, is supposed to account for with the advance and retreat as a 7 out of 10. They made the playoffs last year. They won a series. How is that a 7?
It's not. But is everything less than what happened last year a failure?
Yes.
I just don't know that it is.
I watch baseball very differently. I am. It's black and white to me, I think. Because while we're having this discussion, I'm trying to think of how I could give them a C. I don't know if I ever could. I think it would just be they made the playoffs.
Well,
A, they missed the playoffs.
That's the problem.
F. I will concede to you calling out my part on that, which I think is fair. I don't know how I do it any other way.
So, Hoges, your grade is an F for this?
It is an F for all the reasons that David said, maybe even a little bit angrier than he would have said it, but I don't want to get into it right now because, like David said, my heart's kind of skipping a beat a little bit. I'm getting a little sweaty in my pits right now. I'm just getting frustrated, and I don't want to get into it anymore.
I just want one more note here, Dan. If the scale went from A to Z, yes, there's more gradations.
That's
the
what I
problem
need.
is,
I need to change my scale
David,
to a
what are
letter
you
scale
doing?
from
You
A
just
to Z.
you asked the second question after the class was about to be dismissed.
but I'm saying that's why an F is an F. Like I realize, yes, the White Sox also would get an F.
Would you say an A
but
is
that's
an A
the
and a
lowest
B
you
is
can
a
go.
B?
There's no lower. There's
So is
nothing
this like
lower
an
than
M,
F.
like on the alphabet scale? Like,
Well, yeah, if we were gonna do it, yeah, it's probably.
I don't know.
middling,
It's a
yes.
Z. I think it's a Z for me.
No, it's not. That doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it
They
does.
they finished above 500. Like,
but they
you
were
can't do
so
that.
good, and they
I
should
gave them an F. No, okay. Enough. Let's keep going here. Season's Herbie's headlines here.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
So we had a lot of options through the season, but if we only had to choose one thing to sum up the MLB season of 2024, I'll let either of you talk about it because you care far more about this individual than I do.
can you make your sounder, David? And then I think I'll let Hoges take it over.
Money, doom, 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 doom.
Yeah, I mean, David, you have in the notes here the season of Shohei Ohtani, which I feel like a lot of Yankees fans probably have a big problem with that because, again, there's the whole argument, did Judge actually have a better year than Shohei Ohtani? All I have to say about this, his numbers this year were off the charts phenomenal. The 50-50 thing is absolutely amazing. He didn't even pitch, and he still had... He's going to win the MVP over Aaron Judge, who had a historic season as well. To me, that's just unbelievable with how good this guy is. His OPS was 1.036. He batted .310. He stole 59 bases. He hit 54 home runs. I mean, his WAR was 9.2. I mean, it's just absurd. And he didn't even throw a pitch. And one guy put a tweet out, and I agree with this so much. This season was phenomenal. Every single game where he pitches 7 innings of shutout baseball and hits a home run is 2,000 times more impressive than what this season was. And I think that's what makes him so great. It's cool to watch. It's fun to see him. It's incredible how lacking in charisma he is. It seems like there's just no personality to this guy. And yet he's the face of baseball. It's unbelievable.
So you love Joe Mauer and Shohei Ohtani.
Saying love,
these men have in
I just
common?
appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins.
There you go.
You know, Ohtani is a little bummed, though, because he bet on himself to get a 9.3 WAR,
goodness.
and he just didn't quite hit that threshold.
There was nothing official. He never officially bet on baseball. It was somebody else.
There was an investigation. MLB had nothing to
federal
lose. If he was guilty,
investigation.
he should have been guilty no matter what happened. Okay. It's Dan sitting there eating his canned peaches with tinfoil on his head.
No, that's you are.
I will, until the day I die, I will say it is far more tinfoil to believe that Shohei Ohtani placed no bets than Shohei Ohtani placed bets.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, you want to admit it, but you don't want to seem crazy. But you know you're more crazy in your current perspective.
All right. Well, folks, this episode has gone on quite long enough. We actually have another one planned here for you to look ahead at 2025 and kind of look at the roster and things like that. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and send us out. Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.